When you go into the Grand Forks Art Gallery, Gallery 2 these days, you're transported to a very different time and place in Canada. The time is the early part of the 20th century, and the place is Algonquin Park in Ontario. The show is called Tom Thomson and the Grey Canoe. It celebrates the role that Tom Thomson had in creating a new kind of Canadian art, including his influence on the artists we know now as the Group of Seven. Also, a new way of seeing the Canadian landscape. The show, as the title suggests, also looks at the critical role Tom Thomson's canoe had in his work and in the work of others. It's a show about the man and his passion for the rivers and lakes of his Ontario home. Mike Elliott owns Kettle River Canoes in Grand Forks, and he's an artist in his own right. He's been lovingly restoring wood canvas canoes for a decade now, and one of his restored canoes is in the gallery and is a vital part of this show. I reached Mike at home in Grand Forks and asked how this happened.
Ted Fogg is the curator of the art gallery in Grand Forks, Gallery 2. And he walked into my canoe restoration shop one day. He walked across the street. He said, I have an idea for an exhibit at the art gallery. I'd like to talk about Tom Thomson, and I'd like to talk about his canoe. And do you have an old wreck of a canoe that I can paint gray and hang as part of the show? I said, well, what if Kettle River Canoes restores the canoe completely, and then you can raffle it off and raise some money for the art gallery.
And did you have this canoe at that point, Mike?
No. At that point, I had only ever seen one 16-foot chestnut cruiser, which is the model of canoe that Tom Thomson paddled. I had an 18-foot available, but Ted said, I'd really, really like a 16-foot. So we said, okay, I'll keep my eyes open for it. And this January, he phones up again and said, so are you ready to start the restoration of the canoe? And I said, yeah, as soon as a canoe shows up, because a 16-foot had not shown up. And that day, one of my clients phones and says, I had everything planned to have you restore our canoe, and things have changed in our family. We can't do it now, so just keep the canoe and find it a good home. Well, it was a 16-foot chestnut cruiser.
Oh. So there it landed in your lap.
That's it.
What is the significance of the chestnut canoe, and especially the cruiser that Tom Thomson used?
Tom Thomson, besides being a graphic artist and then painter, basically moved up to Algonquin Park in about 1912 and worked as a professional fishing guide. And his canoe that he used all through Algonquin Park and Georgian Bay and all through that area was a canoe built by the Chestnut Canoe Company out of Fredericton, New Brunswick. They started operations in 1897, and by the 1912 or so, they were quite the operation. They were well known across the country, and so he picked up this canoe, and he wanted everyone to know that it was his canoe. So he painted his canoe a color that he invented himself.
Huh.
He took a light gray color and then added a tube of cobalt blue from his paint kit and created this, what Arthur Lismer, one of the Group of Seven, described as a dove gray. Mm. And so this beautiful sort of slate gray kind of color. And it was very distinctive, and it was definitely Tom Thomson's canoe. And then he introduced Arthur Lismer, A.Y. Jackson, J.E.H. MacDonald, Lorne Harris, Fred Varley, Franklin Carmichael, and Frank Johnson to Northern Ontario. After Tom Thomson's death in 1917, the Group of Seven was formed in 1920.
So with that, the canoe of his, he introduced those people to the landscape that really changed the course of Canadian art.
It really did. He was a huge influence on the Group of Seven. in that he had a Canadian style, and that it was called the Algonquin Park School before it was called the Group of Seven, and it was a style of painting that was definitely iconically Canadian. And really, paved the way for many artists to come.
And of course, the chestnut canoe, iconically Canadian as well.
That's right. They produced about 150,000 canoes in the 80 years that they were in business. They went out of business in 1978, and why the Kettle River Canoes is in business is because people won't part with them. The iconic image of a red canoe on the lake is a chestnut canoe.
It's right up there with the moose and the RCMP officer and the red surge, right?
Yes, right there.
A couple of things I want to ask you. Tom Thomson's own canoe, is it still in existence somewhere?
No. As far as I understand, when he died, his canoe was basically found as a wreck, and he was then presumed drowned, and his body was then found later. But no, his actual canoe was destroyed.
And how did you go about recreating that color? How did you know exactly how to make that gray?
Ted Fogg had studied the whole story very intensely for many years. It took him about 2 years to put this show together, Tom Thomson and the Gray Canoe. Over the course of that, he had various descriptions. There were some paintings that Tom Thomson did, and so I came in one day into the art gallery with a fistful of color swatches, and we just picked one. We basically guessed, as everybody has to guess, at what this dove gray may be.
It's so interesting, isn't it, Mike, to think of that dove gray canoe and how it would, I'm just imagining how it would just disappear in the mists on a lake in Ontario. And
there are still stories of people seeing a ghostly gray canoe and a lone paddler on Canoe Lake in Algonquin Park to this day. The stories live on.
What was it like for you working on this project with this link to Tom Thomson and knowing that this was supporting that whole show at the gallery?
The whole connection with Tom Thomson's art, the whole idea of the connection with Canadian history and Canadian art history really came to life for me as I was bringing this canoe back to life. To then see it on display at the art gallery, people had tears in their eyes, and me as well. It was an adventure and an exploration of that whole time in history and really our connection with Canadian art.
Well, I hope you get a chance to get out canoeing yourself soon.
Well, yes, thank you. We really look forward to it. In the heat of the day, we've got 2 rivers to choose from here in Grand Forks. So Christy and I close up shop a little early and hit the river and take the canoe down the Kettle River.
Couldn't be nicer. Thank you, Mike.
You're very welcome, Cheryl.
That's Mike Elliott. He's the owner of Kettle River Canoes in Grand Forks and a very old friend of mine, talking about the show at the Grand Forks Art Gallery, the Tom Thomson and the Gray Canoe. If you'd like to get a raffle ticket for that canoe that Mike restored, you can contact the gallery, and all the money raised is in support of Gallery 2 in Grand Forks.